The entire bank lobby went silent when the little girl walked through the glass doors with torn shoes, a dirty shirt, and a plastic envelope clutched tightly against her chest. She looked completely out of place among the marble floors, expensive suits, polished shoes, and people carrying briefcases worth more than everything she owned. She approached the nearest counter, stood on her toes, and quietly said, "I just want to see my balance." A few people smiled. One man actually laughed. But nobody knew that the screen she was about to reveal would turn the richest man in the building completely pale. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can change someone's life and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel. You never know when a small act of kindness might become the reason someone keeps believing in tomorrow. It was a cold Tuesday morning in Chicago, Illinois, when 9-year-old Hannah Carter pushed open the heavy glass doors of First Heritage Bank. She had walked nearly 40 minutes through the cold because she had no money for the bus. Her shoes were too big for her feet, borrowed from a neighbor's son, and every few steps she had to pull them back onto her heels. Her brown hair was tangled from the wind, and the sleeves of her faded sweater were several inches too short. Yet there was something unusual about the way she carried herself. She wasn't begging. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't asking anyone for money. She was simply holding a small plastic envelope as if it contained something more valuable than gold. Inside the envelope was an old bank card, a handwritten note, and a photograph of a smiling woman standing beside a little girl. The woman was Hannah's mother, Rebecca. She had been gone for almost 2 years. Rebecca had worked wherever she could find work, cleaning offices at night, washing dishes, taking care of elderly people during the day. She never complained about being tired because Hannah was always waiting for her at home. But one winter evening, Rebecca had collapsed while walking home from work. Doctors later discovered that her heart had been failing for years. There had been no savings, no insurance that covered everything, and no family close enough to help. Before she died, Rebecca had given Hannah the envelope and told her something Hannah never forgot. She said that when she was older, she should take the card to First Heritage Bank and asked them to check the account. Rebecca had smiled through her tears and told her, "Your father wanted to leave something for you. I don't know if it's still there, sweetheart, but promise me you'll check someday." Hannah had promised. After Rebecca's funeral, Hannah went to live with her mother's older cousin, Grace, in a tiny apartment on the south side of Chicago. Grace worked at a grocery store and did everything she could to provide for Hannah, but money was always tight. There were nights when Grace pretended she wasn't hungry so Hannah could have the last bowl of soup. There were mornings when Hannah went to school pretending she had eaten breakfast. And there were birthdays when Hannah didn't ask for presents because she understood that electricity and rent came first. For almost 2 years, Hannah had kept the envelope beneath her mattress. She had been afraid to open it because she believed that whatever her mother had left behind would probably be gone. But 3 days earlier, Grace had become sick and missed work. The landlord had taped a final notice to their apartment door. Their electricity was scheduled to be disconnected. Hannah had looked at the envelope for a long time that night and finally made a decision. She would go to the bank. That morning, she entered First Heritage Bank just after 10 o'clock. Behind the main counter stood several employees dressed in expensive suits. Customers waited in comfortable chairs while a security guard watched the entrance. Near the private banking area sat a man named Marcus Whitmore, one of Chicago's wealthiest businessmen. Marcus was 48 years old and had built a technology company from nothing. His company was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and his name appeared regularly in business magazines. He was at the bank that morning to finalize a major investment. Marcus was the kind of man who rarely noticed ordinary things. He was always rushing, always thinking about numbers, contracts, acquisitions, and deadlines. To him, time was money. He had arrived with his assistant, Thomas, and was waiting for a bank executive to bring him documents worth several $1,000,000. Then he noticed Hannah standing at the counter. At first, he barely looked at her. Then he heard her ask the receptionist if she could check her balance. The receptionist looked confused and asked for identification. Hannah carefully placed the old card on the counter and explained that her mother had opened the account years earlier. The receptionist studied the card and then looked at Hannah's clothes. She politely told her that she would need to speak with a banker. Hannah nodded and waited. That's when a wealthy customer standing nearby chuckled and said something about the bank becoming a place for everyone now. A few people laughed nervously. Hannah lowered her eyes. Marcus heard the laughter and, without thinking, smiled too. He wasn't laughing directly at her, but he didn't stop anyone either. Then Hannah turned toward him. Her eyes met his. There was no anger in them. There was only embarrassment and a quiet determination that made Marcus uncomfortable. Hannah looked at the banker beside Marcus and repeated, "I just want to see my balance." Marcus actually laughed under his breath. It wasn't cruel. It was the kind of careless laugh people make when they believe something is impossible. He looked at the old card in her hand and wondered how much money could possibly be inside an account belonging to a woman who had lived such a difficult life. Then the bank employee swiped the card. The computer screen loaded. At first, nothing happened. The banker frowned and entered the information again. Her expression changed. Marcus noticed. The banker leaned closer to the monitor. Then she stood completely still. Hannah nervously asked if there was a problem. The banker didn't answer immediately. She looked toward her manager, a woman named Sarah Mitchell, and quietly asked her to come over. Sarah hurried across the lobby. She glanced at the screen, and the color drained from her face. Marcus stood up. Something was wrong. He walked closer, expecting perhaps a technical problem. But Sarah turned the monitor slightly toward him. Marcus looked at the number. For several seconds, he couldn't understand what he was seeing. The account balance was $4,872,614.39. The lobby seemed to disappear. Hannah stared at the screen without understanding the number. She had expected maybe $50, maybe a few hundred. She didn't know how to read such a large balance. Marcus stared at the account history. There were deposits going back almost 20 years. Small deposits, then larger ones, and one massive deposit made shortly before Rebecca's death. Marcus's face changed completely. He asked Sarah who had originally established the account. She checked the records. The account belonged to Rebecca Carter, but the beneficiary information contained a name Marcus recognized immediately. His own. Marcus felt as though the floor had shifted beneath him. 20 years earlier, before he became wealthy, Marcus had worked alongside a young woman named Rebecca at a small software company. They had been close friends. Marcus had dreamed of building a company, but had no money to start it. Rebecca had believed in him when nobody else did. She had loaned him money from her savings and refused to accept interest. Marcus had eventually succeeded, but life had taken them in different directions. He had lost contact with Rebecca. He had always assumed she had forgotten about him. She hadn't. According to the records, years after Marcus's company became successful, he had quietly created a charitable investment account. He had intended it to help people who had once helped him, but his lawyers had been unable to locate Rebecca. The money had remained untouched. Rebecca had somehow discovered the account and added Hannah as the beneficiary. But there was more. Marcus remembered a letter Rebecca had sent him nearly 2 decades earlier. He had never opened it. His assistant had mistakenly filed it with old business documents. Marcus had forgotten about it. Sarah found a scanned copy. Rebecca had written that if anything ever happened to her, she wanted Marcus to make sure Hannah was safe. Marcus looked at the little girl standing beside the counter. Hannah wasn't celebrating. She wasn't smiling. She was staring at the number because she didn't understand what it meant. Then she asked the only question that mattered to her. Does that mean my mom left me enough to keep Grace from losing our home? Marcus couldn't speak. He had spent years buying houses, cars, companies, private planes, and expensive watches. He had believed wealth meant having everything. But standing in front of him was a little girl who didn't care about millions of dollars. She cared about keeping a roof over her aunt's head. Marcus crouched down so he was at Hannah's eye level. He told her that her mother had left something much more valuable than money. She had left proof that she had never stopped thinking about her daughter. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. She asked whether her mother had really known Marcus. Marcus nodded. Then Hannah pulled the photograph from her envelope. It showed Rebecca smiling beside her when she was only 3 years old. On the back of the photograph was a sentence written in Rebecca's handwriting. If Hannah ever needs you, please don't let her face the world alone. Marcus read it. His eyes filled with tears. For the first time in many years, the millionaire who could sign million-dollar contracts without blinking found himself unable to hide his emotions. He realized something terrible. He had been laughing at the very person his old friend had trusted him to protect. The following week changed Hannah's life. Marcus didn't simply hand her a check. He arranged for an independent financial guardian to oversee the inheritance until she was old enough to manage it herself. He paid off Grace's debts, secured their home, established a college fund, and made sure Hannah would never again have to choose between food and electricity. But Marcus did something else. He started visiting, not as a billionaire, not as a businessman, as the friend who had failed to keep a promise. He attended Hannah's school play. He helped her build a science project. He sat beside Grace during parent meetings. And when Hannah struggled with mathematics, Marcus hired no tutor. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table and patiently worked through the problems with her. Months later, Marcus created the Rebecca Carter Foundation, dedicated to helping children whose parents had died while struggling financially. He funded emergency housing, school supplies, meals, and educational scholarships. The first building opened in Chicago. Above the entrance was a simple plaque. It read, "For every child who thinks nobody sees them." Hannah was there when Marcus unveiled it. She held his hand, and Marcus finally understood what wealth was supposed to mean. It wasn't about having enough money to buy anything. It was about having enough heart to make sure someone else didn't have to suffer alone. One evening, nearly a year after that day in the bank, Hannah asked Marcus why he had laughed when she first asked to see her balance. Marcus smiled sadly and admitted that he had thought the number on the screen would be small. Hannah looked at him and said that she had thought so too. Then she smiled and added that the number hadn't been the biggest surprise. Marcus asked what had been. She pointed to him. "You came back." Those 3 words broke something open inside him. Because Hannah was right. Money had been sitting in that account for years. But what she had really needed was someone to notice her. Someone to believe her. Someone to stop laughing long enough to look at the screen. And sometimes, that is all a person needs. The chance for somebody to finally see what everyone else overlooked. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing stories about hope, compassion, and second chances to people who need them. And before we end, I have one special request for you. Comment, "Every child deserves to be seen," if you believe no child should ever feel invisible, forgotten, or alone. Because Hannah walked into that bank asking only to see her balance. But she walked out with something money could never buy. She walked out knowing that somewhere in this enormous world, someone finally saw her. And Marcus Whitmore learned that day that the greatest fortune a person can possess isn't found on a bank statement. It's the ability to change a life when you have the chance.